vitamins, yes, they're good for you, but they can also be toxic.
Yeah, absolutely. What in terms of the like authority, like I have to trust this person, and because they're wearing that light white lab coat, there's a guy, Brett Weinstein, who and Eric Weinstein, they're brothers, but he's a evolutionary biologist, and one of the things he talks about is that even though somebody has a PhD, that doesn't necessarily give them the authority to be like know everything and have all the smarts and be just the authority. It's the practice of doing good science that makes you into being able to be an authority. And I find that many people just take it for granted. Oh, you're wearing a white lab coat, or you have a doctorate in something. Oh, okay, you should be taken like seriously, even if you haven't done any real research. You haven't really done any major studies yet to really understand all these nuances. And again, as you were saying about the natural aspects of it, it is fascinating that people look at natural products and they look down upon it in so many ways, in terms of like, oh, it can't possibly do all these things. Like it's dumb nature. It's just the background in my landscape, and I only pay attention really to it when it's beautiful and when it's annoying me because some pest has gotten into my house, right? But other than that, it's just nothing, right? And we're the
snake oil salesman at the carnival, you know.
Yeah, exactly. And we're just this animal that's gone beyond nature, even though we wouldn't even exist if nature wasn't present with us, and we wouldn't be able to make all these things if we didn't have nature. I mean, we are nature, right? And so
we live on it.
Yeah, exactly. And so that the whole idea that that nature is like somehow below us is just it's crazy to me whenever I find people that perceive that. And so again, you said it very well, like we can't force people to perceive these things, because it has been ingrained in their mind for generations already, and just a few generations and something becomes like it never didn't exist, right? And so, like, for example, like Christmas, like, or not necessarily the like historical aspect of Christmas, but like the Macy's Santa Claus Christmas, where you go out and you buy all these presents and you give them to somebody, like that's barely been around for like 80 years, and it's already like this thing that it feels like it's everything, right? It's existed forever, and it never didn't exist. And so to like change people's minds, the saying is you can bring a lead a horse to water, but you can't force it to drink. And I've tried so many times to force it to drink, but it's just you end up doing more damage than good. People have to find it on their own. So that's why if you can get somebody at least to just try it once, that usually can be enough to bring them over the edge, because you've probably been telling them about it a bunch, and so they've already heard all this stuff. They didn't really believe you, but now all of a sudden it's like 2 and 2 are being put together. But what I also like about the cannabis plant is that since it can do all these different things, it can bridge people into the understanding of, oh, nature can do these things. It actually is possible. It has these capabilities, because cannabis can go into pharmaceutical land or medical land. It can go into construction and development. It can go into clothing and everything. I mean, there's just so many different things. It can go into biofuels. There's so many different places that it can expand into. So somebody that's coming at it from whether they're in the construction industry or whatever, they can take it and kind of start building from that line, right? And kind of get in deeper into the plant. And then once they get deeper into the plant, they get to that center point. There's like, wow, there's all these other things it can do. And then it's like, oh, well, nature, this is a plant. It can do all these things. Like, there must be lots of other things that nature can do. And so
way more.
Yeah.
And as far as the white lab jacket thing, this is what always, it really cracked me up. When we grew up, if we had a toothache or a sore throat or strep throat, my grandma would come by and shove a dried root in your mouth and go, chew on that for 3 hours, you know? That was it. It'd be gone the next day. But yet, you talk to a white lab jacket guy and he's like, here, go take a series of penicillin and maybe a viral infection, and they give you penicillin. I'm like, wait a second.
That's not even treating the right thing.
I don't think we're on the right page here. But, they trust this guy because he works in a clean hospital and all of this other stuff. My grandmother just walked in and shoved a piece of dirt in your mouth. Well, I'll tell you what, that lady knew more about healing than anybody I've ever met. And this is where a lot of my nutraceutical background comes from, is listening to my elders and realizing that there was more power in the 5,000 years of research they've done than the 100 years we've done, or 200 years, or whatever you want to call it. And it's more about using natural remedies, and they're very powerful. And I say to people, well, they try something like CBD and they say, well, it didn't work for me. Here's my problem. You cannot take a natural product, which is a very specific thing, and cram it into a westernized body. You eat McDonald's, your water's horrible, you've been vaccinated, you've got all of these toxins and things in you. Nothing natural is going to touch you. You're not going to be sensitive enough. You will react to it, although you won't really
absolutely. You're just not going to notice it. Yeah.
It's like putting a Band-Aid on an arterial wound. You've got to detox and get rid of all the stuff that you've been taking so far, which, by the way, you'll feel a lot better for just getting rid of that. And then natural medicines will have a huge impact on your body. And it's a very different way of thinking, but in the future where we're going, we have to really start stepping up and paying attention to our own health. And that starts very early in life. I was taught by my grandmother, we always had gardens and like I said, we had to, cut our own lumber every winter so that we didn't freeze and all of this. We had hay and all. So we were always very active physically, but we also ate right from the land. And our water always came from a well, and there wasn't a bunch of chemicals and stuff built up in it. We have to start thinking more about this because, look, I'm not sure where the future of health goes, but I'm not really at the point where I'm going to trust anybody anymore. Between the GMOs in our food, the lies on the television about the medicines you're taking. I mean, if you think the lie about the hemp industry was bad, just stop and take a look at what you're being told today.
Yeah.
When the list of side effects is worse than the cancer you have to stop and think twice about whether or not they're doing the job.
Yeah, absolutely.
And unfortunately, I did a TEDx conference quite a few years back where I actually told people that this was happening and that 50% of their drugs, their cancer drugs, were actually placebos, that the pharmaceutical companies couldn't even reproduce their own data. And that TEDx conference gets ripped down every time it goes to YouTube. It takes about 5 minutes.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
yeah, no,
I can't even put it up.
Yeah, no, it's definitely kind of crazy in that sense. Like, I don't have TV, but whenever I go somewhere that does have TV, just like watching all the pharmaceutical ads that play, and I've studied film, and I've studied understanding how to control somebody's emotion while they're watching a video or whatever. And it's just incredible. Every single time it gets to all the side effects, and as you said, like they could list off 500 side effects in a very short bit of time because they're speaking like super fast, so you basically can't hear them. And then also they're showing somebody frolicking through a field in slow motion, and all the daisies passing by, and all the sunbursts, and their children. And it's just like, and that's all somebody can see. They're not even paying attention to all the side effects. Maybe they hear them, but they're not acknowledging them. And yes,
I asked myself the other day, they were always, for a long time, when they put up the generic name of a compound, Viagra, whatever it might be. I noticed in the last 5-10 years, every drug that's named is named after something that rhymes with a song. Like Trelegy, Easy's 1, 2, 3. I swear they're actually naming these things just so they can put a song with it. Look at like 3 or 4 of the top leading ones. They're named after, so they fit with a song. That can't be my mistake.
Yeah, no, it's all.
Look at sitting as a scientist in a lab. I'm not going to call my drug Trelegy.
Yeah, it's the very chemically named or Latin named the very marketable name. Yeah.
Yeah. But now it rhymes with anything that they can actually put a catchy tune to.
Yep. Yeah, no, it's kind of terrifying in that sense. And you also touched on the whole notion of, so my parents were in scientific publishing. They had a scientific publishing company, mostly in material science, but they had a few other fields as well. Just talking with people in the publishing industry, and just learning about the research industry and publishing papers and everything. So much of those papers are backed by money, by a corporation, right? That's trying to sell a product. And so, like, especially in nutrition, like just understanding all the things that we take for granted as, you need 3 meals a day, or you need to drink orange juice with your meal, or whatever it might be. All these different little things were sold to you because somebody did a study, right? And that company paid for that study, and they didn't want anything negative to be in the product study, right? They wanted all the good stuff to be in the study, and we see this in other industries as well, right? In the fossil fuels industry, and like looking at how they've known what the damages are going to be. It's just the fact that they didn't want that stuff to go out to the public because they were making bank, right? And so there's so many, it's really challenging because we need research, right? We very much need research in order to understand these things, but we need to figure out a different kind of funding mechanism. And also grants are just such a terrible mechanism. I mean, it's just like, people are just, it's awful. And so, and then you also kind of touched on the whole notion of, with the field of science, like I kind of look at the field of science as separate from when people say science says, because it's like saying God says, and it's very different from what science really is. Science is really like just the practice and how you're learning about these things, versus like the like overarching science thing. And also most pop science is false by the time it gets out there, because it has to be broken down and understood, and other science is going elsewhere. But anyway, something you said was like ancient cultures have known lots of these things. And the way that I look at science is that really the only thing that it's added in addition to what we know previously, is that it's very specific. And so you can specify things on a really high or like really low or high level. And so you can really talk about them. But looking at so many ancient cultures, yeah, there are probably lots of things that they were false on, right? And certainly, and we're going to find things that we were false on as well. But there was so much that was touching a point, right? It was pointing in the right direction, and because they used it multiple times and it worked. And so through cultures, it was passed down. And so they were pointing in the right directions, or maybe they even got to something, but they maybe didn't know specifically why, like what chemical was then being activated and what chemical was activating the receptor, but they knew it worked, right? And so we need to like really take that into account, because again, we've since like the science boom and everything, we've gotten very egotistical in our understanding of like what nature can do, and understanding of what ancient cultures knew and all this kind of stuff. And it's challenging to change people's minds, but it is happening, as you said. I mean, we are slowly, like, I don't necessarily want people to completely lose respect in researchers and lose respect in doctors and everything, because they're, at least, I mean, many doctors are trying to do the best they can with the knowledge they have, right? And also many people take medicine for granted as, oh, we know everything, but it's like, we know a very limited amount of information, and we're trying to use that limited amount of information to be applied to something to try to treat it. But we really don't know exactly what we've done this enough times that it seems to work. And so it's, yeah, there's just, so it's,
and
it's
not
just,
only that, but when you're talking about a pharmaceutical study, you're talking about, what, 1,000 people, sometimes less in a clinical trial.
Yeah.
Well, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people over thousands of years, okay? We're talking about a much bigger clinical trial just done every day. And nobody wants to kill their husband, so you can guarantee when they give them something, they vetted it pretty well.
Yeah.
And this is right. I want to go back to what you said a few minutes ago. It's worse than, and nutrition is worse than that. Whoever convinced the American public that puffed rice was a better breakfast replacement than a traditional breakfast, that this is equal to your daily, baloney. Are you serious? It's a piece of puffed rice with a bunch of sugar in it. You're telling me that's the same as my bacon, eggs, pancakes, home fries, everything else that I eat in the morning? Let's see you come out in the field and run next to me all day on your wheat puffs, and you ain't gonna make it. So just right there, people should stop and think just for themselves. Yeah, it's convenient, it tastes great, and it's wonderful, and my belly's full enough, or at least there's something in there that shuts off the nausea so I don't feel hungry. But you're not getting nutrition at all. I mean, you really, this is what I was saying, you have to stop and start taking control of your nutrition. You have to stop and take control of your history with disease and medical treatments and all of this. And you don't really want to, and especially in this day and age, wait until the last minute to try to figure out what it is you're doing. You need to say, hey, I could become diabetic because I have a history in my family. Start talking to people like you or me or all of the people that are out here healing people of diabetes using our products. Healing, what I
absolutely.
mean. I'm not making medicinal claims here. People are telling me that they are, using things and there are effects, but and so I think very quickly people are going to start to really stop and think for themselves, and I think a lot of this stuff will start to resonate in a very different way when they stop and they open their eyes and they look at, some of our breakfast manufacturers are now some of our biggest weapons designers. Right? Yeah. Kellogg, Brown, and Root. Where do you think Kellogg started? They also made a nuclear missile and the Manhattan Project, by the way.
Yep, they just figured out that they could make another product to kind of get into a new market and make money elsewhere. And kind of to touch on the nutrition thing again, and specifically diabetes. So My father, we're not 100% certain, but we're pretty sure he had diabetes, and he died when I was 13. And then in high school, so I grew up in a household that basically we never had sugar in it, right? My mom was like total like a nutritionist, or not nutritionist, but she was just like into nutrition, into not taking just a pharmaceutical product to try to cure something, but instead trying to deal with it with diet. And initially, when I got diagnosed, I was not quite type 2 diabetic, but I was getting close, because basically what happened was I went from being at home all the time, and I was even homeschooled for a period of time. Then I went to a Waldorf boarding school in New Hampshire, in Wilton, New Hampshire, and there I had access to sugar all the time. And because I never really had it growing up, I mean, I of course I had it, but it wasn't like an abundant thing. We didn't have dessert after every meal, right?
It was a treat.
Yeah, exactly. It was a treat. Like once in a while, you got this nice treat. I mean, most of the time I was just eating berries, or I was eating tomatoes from the garden or whatever. But it was a treat. And so I went from being pretty healthy, pretty on balance, and everything, to being almost 300 pounds. And I literally ate like 4 or 5 Klondike bars a day. You know, those what would you do? Ooh, for a Klondike bar, the like polar bear thing. And partway through my freshman year, I ended up going to the doctors, and we tested my triglycerides. They were off the charts. And the doctors were like, okay, well, we have all these medicines that we want to put you on. And my mom was just like, no, we're not going to do that. And so I changed my diet. I went off of sugar entirely. I tried initially using like some of the synthetic sugars, but there's so many downsides about those. And they also, like, even if you don't even talk about like the major downsides long term, like one of the shorter term things that can happen with sugars that aren't actually digested by your body, because that's how most of the artificial sweeteners are. They're not actually digested by your body. They just activate the sweet sensors. But one the thing that I found that it could do is that you could train yourself, like you would essentially be training yourself to eat the sugar, right? To like be able to eat something sweet, but your body wouldn't get any calories from it, so it wouldn't think that the sugar was really doing anything, so it would actually end up craving more. And so it would actually cause more damage down the line, because you're not getting all the nutrients you need from that sugar, right? And so your body would think that it's getting sugar, and so it would eat a banana, but it would think it didn't get any of the nutrients or any of the sugars from it. And so anyway, so I stopped doing all the other sugars. I basically just stuck to fruit. And I mean, today I still have to be careful, of course, but I've gotten my numbers all the way back down, and I'm in a controlled state. And it's definitely it's been a few years, so every so often I've put on a little bit of weight during all this kind of pandemic stuff that's going on, because I'm just being stuck at home.
We all have.
Yeah, but other than that,
it's like putting on the freshman 15 again.
Yeah. But it is incredible what diet can do. And kind of to touch on that too, you were saying like you don't want to wait until later in life to then deal with it. And I think that also kind of goes back to where medicine's at today, or what medicine, how it's sold to us, is that it's the reactive, right, care versus the preventative care. And it's made this assumption that, oh, I can treat my body like crap all day long and do it for many years, but later on in life, if I have enough money, I can get all this surgery and take care of myself. But that's just not the case, right? Like you could, yeah, sure, you can replace organs with 3D printed organs. You can do all this different stuff, but there's going to be so many other things that are wrong with your body and how it's functioning, that even those things are only going to be temporary holds, right? They're not going to really take care of you long term. Whereas like diet, getting exercise, and I think something that kind of comes back to this whole thing that like this instantaneous, so I just need to take one pill to solve all my problems, sales pitch, is that people look at diet and exercise and they're like, again, it comes back to that, like they look at it as this very simple thing, like, oh, that's not going to cure me. Like I need to take this pharmaceutical that this person with a white lab coat told me to take, and that will cure me. But like the daily preventative care,
discipline will kill me.
Yeah, exactly. And it's also like the whole aspect too, that it's the longer term care, right? It's the long term effects, right? You don't want to just take something and try to change it all at once. You want to slowly change it out over time. And I kind of look at it like my cousin works at Disney World in project management, and how like he talks about how you can't just like go in and change the whole park at once because it's being used constantly. And so you need to go in, close down one small little section over here, do a few changes, open it back up, close down another section over here, do a few changes, open it back up. You can't just change it all at once, because if you change it all at once, you're going to cause a lot of chaos and havoc. And you may even cause things that were unforeseen, right? And so again, it just comes back to changing people's mentalities about this. And it is happening, but it's like, for me, it's just happening really slowly. I wish it could happen faster, but we can't force that upon anybody.
Exactly. And what we need is exactly what me and my team are working on now. We need more research. We need more peer-reviewed, critical journals. And I don't mean stuff that's anecdotal or pushed out quickly to support a product. I'm talking about real science. Look, the pharmaceutical industry has had decades and decades and decades at this. Biology and evolutionary biologists have had decades and decades and decades at this. We just started. But give us a couple of years and we'll show you what we're talking about. And there's a lot of us who could go back to making, really big salaries in really cushy jobs, but we also realize that we're giving our energy and our time to something that's not going to help our brothers and sisters, our families, our mothers, our fathers, in our environment. And so that's kind of where I have, and my team have decided, hey, we may not be rich. We don't care. We want to do what's right to help people understand what we did for ourselves and how much it can impact their quality of life, And it's only going to take a few people to really turn around and to start to see this before they start to realize, wow, maybe I have been a little narrow-minded. Maybe there are things I should think about. But I think that's happening slowly. But like I said, once we get a few journals out there, I think things are going to start to change.
Yeah, absolutely. I very much agree with that. I mean, having longer term studies is very important, because there's so much data you can't get in a short term study, and there's also just issues with doing studies on mice, because the same guy I mentioned earlier, Brett Weinstein, something that he discovered and somebody else ended up publishing it, and so they're trying to get credit for it again. That's also an issue with a very egotistical landscape. You got to get your name on the document. But one of the things that he found was that studying the telomeres, our current understanding of telomeres is that, like, essentially each telomere can tell your body to regrow new cells, right? And so once you've lost all your telomeres, then your body's going to stop aging, or is going to start aging, because those cells are starting to break down and they're not able to be reproduced. But the mice that are bred for scientific testing primarily never die of disease. They almost always die of cancer of some sort, because they have a much longer chain of telomeres, that eventually those cells will have more chances to go wrong and then cause cancerous growth down the line. And so they're also just they're not really a great model for us to be using. And we really need to be using the human model. And that also, it comes into question of like our current ethical standards and all that kind of stuff, which definitely there's things to be considered in that, but there's so much that we need to change about the way we do research, the way we fund research, and all that kind of stuff. It's vitally important.
Cool. And back to that, you mentioned earlier about, people getting grants for research and all of that. I've gotten several grants over my career. And I'll tell you right now, there is no, and I don't mean this in a negative way, I'm just being, from my observation, there is no free research. There is no ability to do independent research. If you don't do research in one of the big areas, HIV, cancer, infectious disease, you're never going to get a grant. If you want to go study the sea squirt gonad in the Galapagos, nobody's going to give you $500,000 to go do that. Okay. They're just not. So there is this whole concept of freedom in research is really kind of biased.
Yeah, it's skewed.
Yeah, very much. And so this is right back to where we're at. If you have all of this money going to certain areas, then those are going to be the areas that people trust, because there's a ton of research and a ton of data and a ton of optimization. Until you really break down the walls and start to do equal justice to all of these, you're never going to understand anything.
No.
And people always say, well, why would we waste money? Look back at NASA. When we started NASA, we had no idea what we'd learned, but look at all of the stuff that has come out of there. I mean, Tang.
Yeah.
Astronaut ice cream. I mean, come on, these are some of the greatest things on the earth,
Absolutely.
Billions and billions of dollars. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
No,
but you know, you just never know what you're going to learn until you start to do it. And I think we've convinced ourselves now that this is important enough to really start to dive in. And you can jump straight to mouse models or clinical trials or however you want to look at that bulk readout. My team's not doing that. What we're doing is we're isolating CBN and we're studying its kinetic binding effects towards tens of thousands of proteins. We're screening every protein that we have in our library. Does it bind? Does it not bind? CBC, does it bind? Does it not bind? Just by itself. So we have a baseline understanding of what proteins can actually interact with these molecules. Then we're going to see from the AI, when we start to analyze this, that hey, CBN and CBC both bind this protein. Let's look at this a little closer. Are they binding at the same time? Is one binding and one kicking the other out? Now we have a much better picture of where we're going. We can start to tailor these formulations to specific disease states. You don't need 120 different endocannabinoids or phytocannabinoids to cure epilepsy. You only need 3. So the others are actually shooting you in the foot and making your outcome worse. And so that's where we're starting, because that fundamental data, although it's not sexy and it's not sellable and a lot of people aren't going to be wondrous about it, we have to have that data. So that's what me and my team do. We build the fundamental data that will support the entire industry going forward. Because then people can come back and say, my research fits that. And look, they already proved that it binds this protein at this kinetic. And there'll be a fundamental measuring stick going forward. And until we have that, we're really playing in the dark, just like the pharmaceutical company would.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
You nominate 1 million molecules and you try them all and you say, okay, well, that one kills the virus, but it kills the patient. That might not be too bad. Well, this one kills the virus, but it makes the patient really sick and makes them nauseous and everything. That's good enough. We'll put that on the market. That's how they do it. Absolutely. For lack of a better word. And again, I'm not
looking down upon it.
But it's kind of an archaic model. And for them to get into more advanced ways of doing it, it costs them way more. So they really, you know, I think we've seen the outcomes of that.
And kind of as you just touched on that, learning about like which keys go in which locks before you even try going into the neighborhood and unlocking any doors. Because if you just go out and you just try taking a whole ring of keys and just trying every single lock with every single key, it's going to take you forever. Whereas if you can first know, okay, this key goes to that lock, and I need a lock, I need to get in, I need to be able to get into the house with these different keys. Then it makes it a lot easier, and it's definitely, and it's also so challenging to understand that once you put it into the body, because so many other things are happening, that to get through all that noise and actually like, oh, it bound to this specific receptor and then it had these things occur. It's really, really complex. And going back, touching again on the whole grant thing, you had mentioned the aspect of if it's, as long as it's within the box, you can study it. And it's because there's multiple factors that really play into it. One main factor is that they want to make sure that they're getting a return on their investment, right? And so if something's already been studied and we can just do an incremental change, then we're pretty sure that we'll get a return on our investment, right? And then the other factor comes into play too, that since there's such big egos in the scientific field, which is understandable to some degrees. It's like, oh, we're understanding nature and we really understand everything that's going on, but we really understand so little. Is that people, if somebody studied something that they have come to believe that is 100% true and it is shown to be true from the evidence that they've found, but then somebody else comes along and they have evidence that completely denies all that evidence, they don't want it to exist, right? They don't want it to come into play, because all of a sudden their career, all the things that they've ever talked about, all the books that they've written they just cease to exist. They just cease to be correct. And that's not a good approach to science. But of course, humans are not rational beings, unfortunately, as much as I wish that to be the case, at least in many circumstances. But also, like for a specific example on this, like understanding the Sphinx, and understanding the weathering on the Sphinx, there were many scientists that came before that said it was like just 1,000 years old or 2,000 years old or something like that. I don't remember the exact number. But then new like weathering models on the Sphinx have shown that it's potentially tens of thousands of years old and far older than what we previously believed. But there's just so many people that have written so many books and done so many talks on this that believe the first thing, and they don't want it to like come into play. And so it's pushed out as pseudoscience. No, that can't possibly be true. You're just talking about aliens or whatever, right? And so it's just, dealing with humans' egos in this like scientific landscape is just it's mind-boggling how we've even gotten this far. But it's very hopeful in terms of where we are going, because I mean, as you said, like with AI and such, definitely you can have bias because the person that programmed the AI maybe has some bias in terms of how they wrote the code. But many of the times you can find connection points that somebody maybe wouldn't have perceived before because they couldn't they couldn't understand all the different data points, but then also maybe they were looking for something very biased answer that they were trying to get out of it, and then they correlated all this data together, and oh, we got the answer, even though it may not necessarily be correct. And so,
and this is actually a big thing that I argue with people about all the time. Look, evolution is linear. Biochemistry is linear. It's not hard to create algorithms against a linear series, okay? These people who are overthinking it, yeah, it's really just a function of having a critical mass of data that gives you reliable values that you can say are statistically relevant. Now, that is very much in the eye of the beholder, because somebody will say, okay, 5,000 data points is enough. Somebody else say, no, I want 100,000. And then somebody will set a criteria that has to pass this criteria before it's a valid position. So it becomes very hard to look at how you validate something like that. And of course, we know in this generation, p hacking and all of these other value statistic hacking things are all over the place. So we rely on the data. That's it. That's it. Our algorithms are formed to fit the data. And when we see trends, those trends are indicative of nature. That's what we follow. We don't write algorithms that will tell us something. We're writing very complex algorithms that are doing things in a biological way. Let's just say that our algorithms are a little different than most people's. So
absolutely, yeah, absolutely. So kind of
as you know, X-ray crystallographers and atomic physicists, we understand the math of this really well. So
yeah, you kind of touched on that earlier, the whole aspect of understanding mathematics and how it almost seems like nature is built on mathematics. I mean, it's a possibility that maybe we've just found enough patterns to be able to perceive these things, but it just, the more we dive into it, the more math can prove new things. And it's just absolutely incredible. I mean, it's like, for example, like the Higgs boson and the fact that math could predict that thing was there, and now we have to build this massive machine in order to discover the actual thing that's there. It's just, there's so much to it, and it is fascinating. So again, to kind of jump to the nutritional aspect of it, you mentioned the seed and how it's a very healthy protein, or a very healthy nutrient source in general.
But yeah, the hemp protein in and of itself is very, very pure and very easily digested. But we've also created a probiotic for it.
Yeah.
That actually helps to digest it within your body. So we've gone well beyond just your standard. But there's, you know, when you're talking about meat and things like this, you've got prion disease and mad cow disease and you know, all of these other things that are out there. No offense, but I started a company called First Order Foods, and our entire concept is that the closer to the sun that you source your food, the healthier it is. Berries, grasses, roots, nuts, these are first order. The cow actually eats that, okay? And I've never seen a skinny cow. But now by the time you eat that cow, you're taking second order food. Now that cow may have just ate, you know, 4 acres of pesticide or whatever, but even grass. He has concentrated that into his meat, and you're eating that. Now, what about when he has a calf or a chicken lays an egg? That's now third order food, because now she's concentrated all of that toxin into her calf. People have to start paying attention to what's called bioaccumulation. And especially as we go forward through history, because we're toxifying our land, we're toxifying our water, you have to start paying attention to this, because this is the other side of your food and nutrition, is what you stay away from. And so, yes, you're right. There are a lot of things within meats that we really are not, you know, we're not really supposed to eat it, to tell you the truth.
Absolutely.
That's just my opinion. That's my opinion. Yep. I grew up the son of a butcher. I'm an SOB. Okay? So I ate every kind of meat there is. I've butchered every kind of animal you can name, from squirrel to, you know, moose. But I also realized that it wasn't a necessity. that I could actually get everything I needed just from the grass, from the land around me. It takes a little more time to understand what you're doing and to
Yep.
change that diet. But again, we're creatures of habit. What we were taught is what we kind of tend to stay with. And getting outside that comfort zone takes effort, and it's a little scary sometimes. But to sit in one stagnant position all the time, and then looking around and realizing how unhealthy people are getting. Look, I was born in the 70s, and I can remember we didn't have obesity. We didn't have a lot of the problems like we're seeing today.
Yeah.
So something has been changing, be it a sedentary lifestyle, the food we eat, the westernized McDonald's style, fast paced, work 10, 20 hours a day. Mentality,
eat a meal for 5 minutes.
Whether it's stress, you just never know. But we have to stop and really be conscious enough to realize that there is a shift happening, and that it's really very, very unhealthy, and that it really impacts the quality of life that you have.
Yeah, no, I before I really got to dive into much of the science and really understand all the details around it, my first year in college, or my only year in college, I should say, I had read an article, and I'm not sure if it's truthful or not, because I mean there really wasn't any like data or studies available, at least at the time. But I found that maybe if I ate hemp seed and hemp seed alone, like there was a guy that like supposedly had eaten just hemp seed alone and like was able to survive and like be healthy and everything. So I decided to try just eating hemp products for 2 weeks and seeing how that affected me. And I mean, I've gone through many different diets, from being vegan to being a fruitarian to being completely raw to all sorts of different things. I've kind of come back to like a Mediterranean diet, mostly vegetables, a little bit of fish here and there. But it's when I did the hemp diet, I got hemp butter, got hemp bread, and I got hemp seeds. I strongly suggest that if you're going to use hemp flour, you mix it with something else, because it was really dense. It was like eating a brick, basically. And the hemp butter was all right, but it was like trying to spread that on this brick. It just wasn't great. So I
yeah. It's just like Lord of the Rings, more lambda spread.
Yeah. And so I tried, after like 3 days of that, I just got to the point where I would just take a spoonful of hemp seeds and drink water, spoonful of hemp seeds, drink water. But I was going to a school in Arizona called Prescott College. And it's a like very much adventure ed school. And so we were going outside all the time. We were hiking mountains, or we were doing map production, or understanding how to use maps, and hiking through woods. And so I was active all the time. And for those 2 weeks, I definitely felt really good. I mean, it definitely took a little bit of time for my body to adjust to the new nutrients coming in, and learning how to process and everything. But after like a few days, I felt much better. I'm sure now if I did blood work before and blood work after, there would probably be some things that were missing from my diet. But kind of on that note, what are things that like what does hemp seed provide for you, and then what are things that it doesn't provide for you that you maybe need to supplement with other foods or whatever?
It's actually very dynamic. So not only is there the protein itself, but there's a lot of vitamins and minerals. There's your omega-6s, your omega-3s. I mean, when you look at a base protein for its ratios and what it has in it, it's very dynamic, very clean. As far as, essential amino acids, stuff like that, you have to get from other sources, okay?
Yeah.
You can get some of them. But as far as using a protein base for any diet, you've got rice and pea and pumpkin and other things that you can use. I use all of these. But hemp protein is very, very, very unique in its profile, and especially with the like I said, the oils that it has in it, and its vitamins profile, and not only that, but it has a ton of the base amino acids. These are, so like I was saying before, when you eat, meat or a cow, you don't use that energy directly, okay? You have to break all that protein down, and it creates a lot of toxins, it takes a lot of energy. Then you have to put them all back together the way you use them. You don't just take a cow protein and instantly start using it. That's what people don't realize, that you only actually get about 40% of the energy from the food you eat, because the rest is spent in processing it and getting rid of it. When you're eating vegetables, fruits, hemp protein, you can build those proteins right from the base amino acids, right from the base elements, right from the base nutrients, the base, vitamins, everything that you have. Now there are, some things that you want to supplement, and you can look through. I'm not really familiar with. I don't have a list or anything about everything that's missing. You can go to the, I can send you the Vigo stuff, and we can actually let people look at that.
That'd be
because
great.
that is an incredibly well-researched product. So what we did was we just married it with, like I said, the kale, spinach extracts, apple, mango, avocado, and then we added in the berries and a few other things that are probiotic and a few other things. And this has almost every vitamin in the world in it at almost the perfect levels. And it has all the protein and sustenance that you need. And then when we put the CBD in it, it's even your medicine. And you have to remember, now the reason why we started thinking about this was because when I started thinking about nutrition, I had listened to a lot of people making smoothies, because this seemed to be the way that a lot of people had started to really resonate with how they were going to do their food in the morning, and they love the blended stuff. So I was thinking, okay, that's all right. But when I started looking at it, I said, people are going out and they're just throwing stuff in the blender. And I started actually doing a few calculations. And let's take a example here. If you put mango, avocado, kale, and spinach, they all sound very healthy, right? If you put those into a blender, blend them up, and drink it, now you're gonna have to drink 2 or 3 big shakes. But you can give somebody 400 times the dose of iron that you should have for a day. Now, if you're an anemic patient or somebody who's on, cancer therapy, this could kill you.
Yeah.
I mean, so even in and of itself, vitamins, yes, they're good for you, but they can also be toxic at certain levels in certain conditions, and people just aren't thinking about that. Just like people who are taking cholesterol medicine, eating grapefruit in the morning, they didn't know about these cross reactivities in their livers and everything else until 50 years down the road when people started dying. It just happens so slowly that you don't realize it.
Yeah.
And this is why I say people need to start, really doing their research and taking a bit of time to look into this. Look, you'll spend 4 days trying to plan a vacation, but you won't spend an hour trying to plan your nutrition.
Yeah, it's very true. Yeah. It's definitely.
Yeah, and so that's where I woke up, and I realized that, yes, people are interested in nutrition, but they know nothing about it.
Thank you very much for joining us here on WhatCannaRadio. If you enjoyed what you heard and you'd like to hear more, please consider smashing that like button below and subscribing to our channel so you can be the first to know when we release new content. If you enjoyed the video so much that you'd like to watch another right this moment, check out our video right here. Or if you'd like to see what YouTube is offering to you, check out the videos over here or down below. Thank you very much for joining us, and have yourselves a wonderful day.